I was just messing around today trying to work out how much money you actually need to be financially free and retire. The numbers are going to shock you. I'm going to go over the calculations with you, but the net result is this. You're going to need about $2.5 million to $4 million if you want to retire financially free. Now, what does it mean to be financially free? We all know what retirement is, right? Financially free just means that the amount of income that you earn from your assets and the things that you own, the companies that you own and the houses and the properties, that sort of stuff, all that income that comes from that pays for your living. And it's probably one of the most common financial goals that people have. You know, I'd like to one day have so much money that I don't have to work. So that's financially free. Here are some of the things I considered in trying to come up with that sum of money. The first thing is that my calculations are all based on living here in Australia. So I assume that this could be different for you depending on where you're from. So what I've done as well is I've included a link on the description to a spreadsheet which I use to do these calculations. So you can shove in your own numbers and see if they work out for you as well. So the next thing to factor into this calculation is that I'm projecting an imaginary lifestyle which I would like to live. Now, it isn't a super outrageous lifestyle, but it is luxurious. And I sort of figured that, hey, if I want to retire, I want to retire with style, right? So let's work with numbers that are a little bit on the richer end, shall we say. Now, I worked this out roughly with my scenario where it's me and my wife and a child. And I'm just kind of working off the fact that I would like to have one normal car, one luxurious car, some toys like maybe a motorbike or a camper van or something like that, maybe even a small boat. I've got budgets for toys, I've got budgets for holidays, I've got budgets for going and eating out on a regular basis. And I'm definitely not shopping at the bottom aisle. I'm shopping at the medium to the top aisle sort of thing. Okay, so it's not a poor lifestyle. It is definitely a luxurious lifestyle I'm working with here. But you know, we are talking about financial freedom, and when you think about it, you're not really aiming to spend your entire life's work just so that you can retire with like nothing. The other thing I'm considering in here is with my child, my goal is to send him to university, and I'll pay for that, you know, pay for a public school, as well as I'd like to leave him with a home, or rather I'd like to set him up with a home so that he can get a quick start in life, have a roof over his head, and he can just basically focus on himself. The other thing I'm not counting in are pensions and handouts. So presumably when you get older, you might get some pensions. Here's a scary thing to think about with the pension you might receive. In Australia, if you have your own home and a little bit of income on top of that, just a little bit, we're not talking about a lot here at all, your pension is pretty much sitting at about $37,000 per couple. So you can kind of live on it, but it's not very much. The other reason why I didn't factor in pensions is who knows if it's still going to be around by the time I choose to retire. The other thing that's crucial here is I'm assuming that I'm working between a 5% and a 7.5% extraction from my assets. So if my assets are worth, say, $1 million, I might make between $50,000 and $75,000 a year from that asset base. And I'm working with today's money. So I'm not looking at a value of money before or the value of the money in the future. You got to remember that as time goes by, the dollar that you have in your pocket right now is worth less and less. And I'm working with a 35% tax rate for Australians. It's loose math, but it's interesting to just see what the outcome was. So $4.6 million is what you need to have a lifestyle that looks like this. In today's terms, to live like that, you're going to have to earn roughly $276,000 a year. What? You heard me right. Now, exactly how many people in Australia, or rather how many households in Australia actually have $4.8 million? That sounds like an astronomical amount of money. Turns out that number is 2.8%. That means roughly 1 in every 50 families actually have enough money in Australia to live like that. That's crazy. So on one hand, 4.8 million sounds like an insane amount of money, and on the other hand, 1 in every 50 actually pull it off. Now what I don't know is whether the money was gifted in the first place or whether that was earned. So is it possible for you to go from 0 to 4.8 million? Of course it's possible. I don't have the stats for how many people actually pull it off. I got a lot of my stats from the Australian census, so that information is actually freely available. But the last time this information was captured was in 2016, so I'm not entirely certain how up to date the information is. Now I did another calculation where it's less rich and just kind of worked off if you were to not hand your child any assets and not pay for their university and let them sort of take a government loan of some sort. In Australia I think it's called HECS, and then when I die they get whatever I own, and that's the gift. So if you kind of work off that basis instead, the numbers kind of change a little bit, but actually not as much as you would think. This is where the $2.8 million comes in. If you had $2.8 million today, you could retire if you were fairly stringent on things like not having luxury cars, not having luxury toys to play with, still factoring in a little bit so that you can get out and eat and have a little bit of fun. But even without paying for your child's education and you don't hand them a free home, that's still a whopping $2.8 million. But many more Australians can afford this. That brings you to the 6.16% of Australians that can pull it off, which is now 1 in every 16 homes instead. Because you have to factor in inflation, if you're planning on retiring 20 years from now, that number jumps up ridiculously. On the cheap end, you're going to need about 4 and a bit million. And on the high end, you're going to need up to $9 million. It's actually not that ridiculous to think, because if you just went back 20 years ago, that number would have been a fraction of the amount. It's really inflation that's the killer. If you've got cash in your pocket, that's worth less every day. Anyway, the next time you're walking down the street and you're looking at people, count. Because for every 16 families you meet, one's actually pulled it off. Anyway, I've got on the description a link to my spreadsheet. It's just all a bit of fun. Feel free to play with it and try work out exactly how much you need to retire financially free. Anyway, I'd really appreciate a like and a subscribe, so please do that. But also in the comments, if you thought I missed anything out in my calculation, I'd really like to hear, and I can make a follow-up video to consider the things that I've left out. I'm sure there are plenty. $4.6 million, what the